What if I told you that Rome's greatest weapon was not the sword or the shield, but sleep? We are used to seeing legionnaires as iron soldiers marching tirelessly across continents. But their strength was based not only on discipline and weapons. Rome's true power lay in its ability to recover even in sleep. And what you are about to hear explains why entire civilizations feared the sound of Roman footsteps before a battle even began. Each legionary camp was arranged like a miniature city. Straight streets, guard posts, a strict distribution of tents and silence as if before a storm. Soldiers slept on a schedule in identical conditions under leather shelters that protected them from wind and rain. Imagine arriving after marching dozens of kilometers only to build an entire fortress before resting. Yet for Roman soldiers, this was as natural as breathing. Even rest was subject to strategy for the Romans. Sleep was not a weakness, but part of the military machine. Watch the video to the end to find out how an ordinary soldier's cloak could be turned into a means of heating and camouflage, why nighttime discipline in the camp was considered sacred, and how this ideal order in sleep allowed Rome to control half the world. And near the end, you will discover why some Roman soldiers could survive freezing nights with nothing but a shield and a wool cloak. What I am about to show you turns our entire understanding of the Roman military machine upside down. We are used to thinking that legionnaires were forged from iron and endurance, capable of going without sleep for days on end. But the truth is much more interesting and pragmatic. Roman commanders such as Caesar and Trajan understood a fundamental truth. One exhausted soldier could endanger an entire legion. A tired soldier is a bad soldier, vulnerable to ambushes and mistakes. Therefore, the entire logistics of the march were built not around the battle, but around the next night's lodging. The strength of the legion was restored every night in a precise ritualistic order. This system was not just a good idea. It was one of the most advanced military recovery systems the ancient world had ever seen. It was an ironclad law. Every legionnaire knew that after an exhausting day's march, he would not find a chaotic encampment, but an organized camp. This certainty was a huge psychological advantage over their opponents. The tribes at Rome fought often relied on surprise night attacks. But imagine the fear of attacking an army that transformed empty land into a fortified city before sunset. But the Roman camp was designed to make this tactic an extremely risky undertaking for the attackers. The uniqueness of this approach was that rest was not considered a luxury, but part of the combat mission. Soldiers were not simply entitled to sleep. They were required to rest in order to be fully combat-ready the next day. To the Romans, proper sleep was just as important as sharpened swords and disciplined formations. This philosophy permeated the entire army structure from the high command to the last recruit. Rejecting this system would be tantamount to refusing to clean one's weapons. Commanders understood that battles are won with fresh legs and a clear mind. While Rome's enemies often slept in fits and starts in unprepared places, the Roman army carried its rest system with it. A moving civilization protected by routine, discipline, and engineering genius. The camp was a portable fortress that guaranteed safe sleep. Every soldier contributed to this security by working on the construction of fortifications. It was a collective responsibility that brought collective benefits. Soldiers dug trenches not for their centurions, but for themselves so they could sleep peacefully. And that simple motivation made them work faster than armies, driven only by fear. Roman soldiers were professionals, and their professionalism was measured not only by their skill with a sword, but also by their discipline. Discipline required restoration. Therefore, nighttime sleep was as regulated a process as marching. There was a strict curfew, clear guard changes, and a clear understanding of the importance of silence in the camp. Every sound in the darkness could mean life or death. Violations of this order were severely punished as they jeopardized the combat readiness of the entire unit. Let's look at it from another angle. An army that does not sleep cannot fight for long. The Romans planned their campaigns years in advance. They could not afford to burn out in the first skirmish. Their enemies fought battles. Rome fought wars of endurance. Systematic rest was an investment in the long-term endurance of the legions. It was this endurance, and not just tactical genius, that allowed them to conquer vast territories. They simply outlasted their enemies, who wore themselves out sooner. This philosophy was perfected to the point of automatism. And that may have been Rome's deadliest advantage of all. Soldiers were so accustomed to this cycle of march, camp, sleep that they could perform it under any conditions. Whether it was raining in Britain or the sun was beating down in Syria, the ritual remained the same. This predictability reduced stress and gave the soldiers psychological stability. They knew that in the chaos of war, there was an island of order, their night camp, a place where fear stopped at the ramparts. In essence, the Roman army was the first to understand the importance of the psychophysical recovery of personnel. This was not humanism in the modern sense, but a cold and pragmatic calculation. The effectiveness of a soldier was a resource that needed to be preserved and replenished. Rome understood something modern science only confirmed thousands of years later. Every hour of sleep was as much a contribution to victory as every sharpened sword. The enemy may have outnumbered them, but the Romans surpassed them in the organization of rest. Modern armies pay great attention to sleep and wake cycles, but the Romans discovered this principle 2,000 years ago. They intuitively or empirically understood what science has now proven. And once you understand this, Roman dominance suddenly makes perfect sense. A rested brain makes better decisions, and a rested body reacts faster. Every legionnaire who fell asleep in his tent was part of this recovery system. The Roman approach to rest was as revolutionary as their combat tactics. It was a system that ensured recovery on an industrial, and trust me, what Roman soldiers were forced to do during freezing nights without tents will completely change the way you see ancient warfare, because the harshest part is still coming. Imagine thousands of soldiers waking up every morning refreshed, organized, and ready to fight again. What do you think was more important for a soldier? A strong shield or a guaranteed 8 hours of sleep? Share your opinion in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next studies. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the Romans built a fortress in just 3 hours? Because what happened next every evening was nothing short of unbelievable. Every time the Roman army stopped for the night, even for just one night, it erected a fully fortified camp known as a castrum. This was not improvisation. It was standard operating procedure. Whether they were in peaceful Gaul or hostile Partha, the ritual was the same. The soldiers did not eat or sleep until the camp was fully secured. This rule was carved into the very heart of Roman military doctrine. Imagine the discipline required after an exhausting march to still spend hours building walls before resting. The process began while still on the march. Scouts and special engineers called grammati were sent ahead. They chose a suitable location for the camp, usually on high ground and near a water source. Using a special tool, a groma, they marked out a perfect rectangle on the ground. They determined the location of the main streets, the praetorium for the commander, and the places for each cohort and centuria. It was military precision that looked almost mechanical. By the time the main army arrived, the camp plan was already ready. As soon as the legions arrived at the site, work began. The soldiers were divided into two groups. One part, fully armed, stood in combat formation, ready to repel any sudden attack. The other part, putting aside their shields, but leaving their swords on their belts, took up shovels, pickaxes, and axes. This balance between combat readiness and construction speed amazed even Rome's enemies. These tools, known as delabra, were as much a part of their equipment as their weapons. The work proceeded with incredible speed and coordination. First, the soldiers dug a trench or falca. The depth and width of the trench could vary depending on the perceived threat, but it was always impressive. Some enemy tribes reportedly abandoned attacks the moment they saw the camp defenses rising. The earth from the trench was not simply thrown away, but carefully laid on the inside, forming a rampart or agger. This rampart was a serious obstacle in itself. The soldiers worked in sections, with each center responsible for its own section, which created an element of competition. A palisade of alum was erected on top of the earthen rampart. Every soldier knew that the faster they built, the sooner they could finally rest. Each legionnaire carried 2 or 3 pointed stakes sudis. These stakes were quickly driven into the ground, intertwined, and formed a solid, impenetrable wall. As a result, in just a few hours, a fortress protected by a moat, a rampart, and a palisade would spring up out of nowhere. To Rome's enemies, it must have looked like magic. What if I told you that the Roman army's deadliest battles often began after sunset? Not with swords, not with cavalry charges, but with fear in the darkness outside the camp walls. Because while the enemy shivered in forests and empty fields, Roman legionnaires were already preparing for something their enemies could barely imagine. safe sleep inside a fortress built in only a few hours. And what happened during those nights explains why Rome conquered half the known world. The moment darkness covered the horizon, the Roman camp transformed into a living machine. Fires flickered between rows of leather tents. Shadows moved along the ramparts. Orders echoed quietly through the streets of the camp, while thousands of exhausted soldiers prepared for the most important battle of the day. Recovery. Rome understood a terrifying truth that many armies ignored. An exhausted soldier becomes weak long before he becomes wounded, and this is where Roman military genius becomes almost unbelievable. Inside every camp, 8 soldiers shared a tiny leather tent no larger than a small room. 8 men sleeping shoulder to shoulder after marching for entire days under rain, snow, or burning desert heat. No privacy, no comfort, only discipline, exhaustion, and trust. These groups were called contuberniums, and they became the true backbone of the Roman army. Because a soldier did not fight only for Rome, he fought for the 7 men sleeping beside him every night. Imagine the sounds inside those tents. Wet armor drying beside small fires, heavy breathing after endless marches, quiet conversations about home, fear, food, and battle. Outside the walls, enemy tribes waited in darkness. But inside the Roman camp, thousands of legionnaires rested with absolute confidence that someone was always awake protecting them. That confidence changed everything. The Roman night was divided into strict guard rotations called vigilia. Every few hours, trumpets shattered the silence and new guards replaced the old ones along the ramparts. No soldier knew when an ambush might come. No sentry was allowed to relax. A single sleeping guard could endanger an entire legion. And the punishment for failing this duty was terrifying enough that few dared to risk it. While some soldiers slept, others stood motionless in freezing wind and darkness, staring into forests where enemies could be hiding only meters away. Imagine standing there for hours hearing nothing except distant wolves, creaking leather armor, and the sound of wind against sharpened stakes. Every shadow could mean death. And yet this endless cycle of discipline gave Roman soldiers something priceless: real rest. Because unlike most ancient armies, Roman soldiers actually trusted their camp enough to sleep deeply. Their enemies rarely had this luxury. Tribal warriors often slept in scattered groups without walls, organized patrols, or fortified defenses. One surprise attack could throw an entire army into chaos before sunrise. But Roman camps were different. Every trench, every stake, every guard rotation existed for one purpose: allowing the army to wake up stronger than the day before. The psychological effect was devastating. Imagine being an enemy scout secretly watching the Romans at night. By sunset, an empty field becomes a fortified city glowing with firelight. Thousands of soldiers disappear behind walls, protected by trenches and sharpened stakes. Guards patrol constantly while organized streets divide the camp with almost unnatural precision. Then by sunrise, the entire fortress vanishes as the army marches away again. To Rome's enemies, this did not feel human. It felt unstoppable. But what truly made Roman knights legendary was not only discipline. It was adaptability. Roman soldiers learned to survive in conditions that would destroy most armies. In the frozen forests of Germany, legionnaires covered tent floors with straw, branches, and animal skins to survive icy ground. 8 soldiers slept pressed tightly together, using shared body heat to stay alive during brutal winters. In deserts like Syria and Judea, the danger became heat and dehydration. During the day, leather tents turned into ovens under the burning sun. Water became more valuable than gold. Soldiers often slept outside under open skies wrapped in wool cloaks, while keeping weapons close beside them. Even at night, fear never disappeared completely. And still, the Roman system continued to work. This ability to adapt may have been one of Rome's greatest hidden weapons. The legionnaires carried survival itself with them. Their cloaks became blankets. Their shields became emergency shelters against freezing wind. Their camps became moving fortresses. Every object had multiple purposes because Roman soldiers were trained not just to fight battles, but to survive endless campaigns. Even dinner became part of military strategy. After the camp was secured, soldiers gathered beside fires preparing simple but powerful meals: thick porridge, flatbread, garlic, beans, sometimes dried meat if supplies allowed. Hot food restored warmth, morale, and energy after brutal marches. Around those fires, soldiers repaired armor, sharpened swords, cleaned boots, and quietly prepared for the next day of war. Then slowly the camp grew silent. Fires dimmed. Conversations disappeared. Thousands of exhausted men wrapped themselves in heavy wool cloaks and lay down inside leather tents while guards watched from the ramparts under the night sky. Beyond the walls waited cold darkness, wild animals, and enemy warriors. But inside the camp existed order, routine, and safety. That feeling of safety was Rome's true superpower. Because the Roman army did not merely conquer through violence. It conquered through endurance. While enemy armies exhausted themselves with fear, chaos, and sleepless nights, the legions recovered with terrifying efficiency. Every morning they woke organized, disciplined, and psychologically stronger than the armies facing them. And perhaps that is the greatest military lesson Rome ever discovered. Empires are not built only by winning battles. They are built by surviving long enough to fight the next one. So the next time you imagine Roman legionnaires marching across Europe, remember this. Their greatest weapon may not have been the sword in their hands, but the sleep they protected every single night behind walls they built themselves. What part of Roman military life shocked you the most? The portable fortresses, the brutal discipline, or the way they turned sleep into a weapon? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because in the next video, we'll reveal how Roman soldiers survived deadly winters, starvation, and marches that destroyed entire armies.